Now, the 100 Club in London is scheduled to close this Christmas due to rising running costs. There's a benefit gig happening in December. Playing at it, Ronnie Wood and Mick Taylor, they're on the bill, amongst others. Now, Mick Jagger went to the 100 Club a lot to see his blues idols. So our Liz Barnes caught up with Sir Mick to see what he thought of the proposed closure. And Liz started off by asking him how important places like the 100 Club were when the Stones were starting out.
Well, the thing was, in the early 60s was a big kind of changeover period, because in these places like the 100 Club and the Marquee, they were the bastions of trad jazz. And there was very few, as now, which is one of the reasons why these clubs are kind of important. There's not that many live places to play of this kind, you know what I mean? So in those days, if you wanted to play somewhere, there was the 100 Club, there was the Marquee, there was all these places, but they didn't really want to know about anything that they thought smacked of rock and roll. They were like trad jazz, but the trad jazz thing was sort of fading out. So the actual people that ran the clubs were kind of having to think, well, wait a minute, we're not really putting in the people. We maybe need something else. So this was a big transition period, and so that they would like give one night to have like they didn't want to call it rock and roll, so they called it rhythm and blues, you know. Mm-hmm. And of course we played blues, but we played anything, that we wanted. But so the early 60s was the changeover time, and then these bands started to have, blues and rhythm and blues and other things, but trad jazz, in the early 60s. So these clubs, were very important for, the early stages of these bands.
Because at that time, you were kind of the bad boys bringing in the new sound, and
it was a new music, and because they were jazz clubs and people that they were very, very conservative, and they didn't want any kind of music in there, and that was the kind of end of that era.
Speaking about the 100 Club specifically, then, did you ever go as a punter?
Yeah, I would go as a punter. You would. I can't even remember who's playing. You wouldn't even care who was playing. You just go and have a drink, and see what was going on. And there was, there was a lot going on in the 100 Club. There was so many kind of people from the blues period played there, visiting people. It got to be a place where people would go and drop in and jam and all that sort of thing, as well as to have big blues names playing there, and that's where they would be booked. People like Bo Diddley, Freddie King, Muddy Waters played there. So it was a really, centre for blues playing.
What made it special? Because obviously, it must have had some sort of atmosphere. What was it about it?
Well, it's a grungy, horrible kind of, but it had a lot of atmosphere, and these places, they just kind of soak up the feeling of all the people that have played there before you. They seem to have they're sort of redolent with all these sounds and all these people that have, hang out there at night after night after night, and you just, you feel that you're living in a very, very, someone else's very, very lived-in place.
Do you think that places like the 100 Club can get forgotten once bands get big? Do you think it's important to, inverted commas, remember where you came from?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important. I think what's important is that you have places where bands can cut their teeth, and that you have places of a certain intimacy and size that new bands can experiment in, and you get people can do their first gigs, and then while they're on the club circuit, there's somewhere established that they can play. And there's not that many places in London, or indeed any city, but there's not that many great places in London that you can say that about, and this goes back, back and back and back, to even the 50s, and there's a handful of places. There's only that, and there's not millions of them, that one going down doesn't really matter because there's thousands of others mushrooming. There really isn't.
I wanted to know a little bit about when you played there with the Stones in 82, because that was... Tell me a bit about that, because it was a benefit for your piano player at the time, wasn't it?
It was a benefit for Ian Stewart, who was our piano player, and, we went down there. We had a lot of people come to play, a bit sad and everything, but we remembered him and because he used to like to play in the 100 Club. He used to guest in the 100 Club, and and so that was one of the nights we played there. The other time we played there was we played a kind of sneak gig in there, and I think in the 86 or something like that. I remember that. I remember being down there. I think the first one was Eric Clapton and Pete Townsend were there. I think many others too. But I mean, we never played the 100 Club when we first started because we used to play. We couldn't get a gig at the 100 Club. But it was nice actually playing there in the end. We didn't play there till the 80s.
So it's quite aspirational, even in the 80s, for the Stones.
Well, it was a good thing to have done it because we'd never done it. Because we played in other clubs. We played in the Marquee, and we played in our little clubs in Richmond, and we played in Ealing and all these little clubs. But we never actually played in the 100 Club in the early 60s.
Do you feel any sort of responsibility for places like the 100 Club, as Mick Jagger? I mean, do you feel like, is that on your shoulders a little bit sometimes?
No, I think that if life sort of, you can't expect everything to be the same, and you can't expect, you can't take anything for granted, and people have to, sometimes you have to work a little bit to keep sort of certain things going, and you hope that they will still exist, And so, as I said before, there's a real need for these kind of places, and it's, they have a connection with the past, and the 100 Club goes back to even the beginning of the 20th century. I think there was a club there, and it's kind of good that they're still going, and even if the type of music changes every kind of 10, 20 years, then that's fine, But I think it's good that you have that connection.
Do you ever get an urge to play in small venues again? Do you ever get a bit sick of
playing in big ones? I mean, it's great to play in small venues. I think it's fun to play in small venues. You can do what you like in a small venue. You can branch out. In a big venue, you can't really do that. And I think playing in a small place is fun. It's a laugh. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Can be the 100 Club. It can be a theatre. But every size place has got its own kind of style of music that fits it.
And just finally, if you were going to play at the 100 Club again with the Stones, what Stones track or tracks would lend themselves to such a venue? What would you want to really get out?
Well, you could play blues in the 100 Club, I think. You know what I mean? You could play a lot more blues than you could get away with in a big club, so you could bring out all your blues repertoire. But you can play anything in a club. It doesn't matter. You can play the loudest sort of rock, thrashy thing you want, but then you can also go down to playing a really kind of intimate blues song. So yeah, I think I associate 100 Club with being a blues club. I know it really isn't anymore, but that's what I associate it with.